Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Raggio. I'm a senior fellow at Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor of FDD's Long War Journal. This is Generation Jihad, the podcast that covers all things in what used to be known as the global war on terror, but we now call the Long War. It's Monday, so my co-host, friend, and colleague, Joe Trusman, joins me at Generation Jihad. Joe is a senior research analyst at FDD's Long War Journal, where he covers all things related to Palestinian terror groups, Gaza, Israel, Hezbollah, you name it. Joe follows it. We can go on and on. Joe, great to have you back on Generation Jihad.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Oh, yeah. Always a pleasure, Joe. We got a lot to talk about today. A lot going on in Gaza. There's certainly been a lot of activity with militias, but we'll sidestep that today, and we'll focus in on what's happening in and around Gaza, because there's a lot of news on that over the weekend. Let's start off over the weekend, Joe. The Israel Defense Force rescued 2 hostages in Rafah. Give us a little detail. What happened there? What do we know about the hostages themselves? Do we know anything about the conditions they were being held in, and so on?
What an active weekend as far as Gaza is concerned, but in particular, there was the hostage rescue that occurred overnight in the southern Gaza Strip in Rafah. And speaking of Rafah, very quickly, Rafah has been, right now, it's the last key or major stronghold of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other Palestinian terrorist groups that has not been invaded or attacked by the Israelis, or there hasn't been a ground invasion, I'll say, in Rafah. So we've been hearing a lot of things about in the news about that, but we'll talk about more about that after. But anyway, so yeah, 2 hostages that were rescued by by special forces, Israeli special forces. They were kidnapped on October 7th from one of the Israeli communities near the Gaza Strip, and they were rescued by these special forces. There was also during the rescue operation, there was bombing in Rafah, that area, by the Israeli Defense Forces to act as almost kind of like a diversion, you can say, right? So during that time, these hostages were rescued, and it's really good news. It's one of those things. Unfortunately, we haven't heard about a lot in the last 4 months. I think there has been maybe one or two hostages that have been rescued alive by the Israeli Defense Forces since the war began. And that just shows how difficult this type of operation is. Trying to find the needle in a haystack, right? So and a lot of this was based. This rescue operation was based off intelligence, right? By terrorists that were captured, and information passed along to the Israelis. So and it worked out, thankfully. But there's more than 130 hostages left in Gaza, right? So there's still a lot more work to do, but great news, right? So we'll see what happens in the coming weeks. But I think Rafah, kind of like I was saying earlier, just a little while ago, I think Rafah is going to be an interesting operation for the Israelis. I think a lot's going to be discovered there as far as terrorist infrastructure and hopefully a lot of the hostages.
So before we turn to Rafah, does the Israel Defense Forces believe that the city of Khan Younis and the surrounding areas, do they believe that's under control, or there's still significant operations underway there?
That's a good question. So just for our listeners, so Rafah, like I was saying, is in southern Gaza. Khan Younis is just a little bit more north of Rafah, but still considered southern Gaza. Nevertheless, the IDF has been operating there, and in the last few weeks, I would not say Khan Younis is conquered. All right, but interestingly, the IDF's chief of staff, the head of the Shabak, which is Israel's Israel's security agency, they actually visited Khan Younis over the weekend. Okay, so that tells you that they're making progress there. They're winning this. This leadership, Israeli leadership, is actually visiting the site. So this area, which is good news. But remember, Khan Younis is another key stronghold for Hamas Islamic Jihad. The Israelis had a tough time there in the 2014 war. Okay, so and they're making great progress, but it's not. I wouldn't say it's free of Hamas or Islamic Jihad, but progress is being made. So that's the good news.
Yeah, just curious. I mean, because it does seem that Rafah is the next big step, and the Israelis approach this, I think, as you and I had suspected, right, from moving from north to south. So there's been a lot of pressure on Israel about going into Rafah. The Biden administration is warning Israel that it shouldn't conduct an operation in Rafah without safeguarding civilians. Do you believe the administration that it's going to get more and more difficult for Israel to operate in Rafah as it has in other cities, or are the Israelis going to just ignore this as they've essentially ignored pressure from the Biden administration?
Right. So you can look at it all sorts of different ways. So there's no doubt that a lot of the civilian population of Gaza fled south to Rafah, okay, during the beginning, especially at the beginning of the war, for obvious reasons. There's a war going on, so they flee to safety. A lot of those people went to Rafah. Now, but Israel, the problem now is that Israel needs to figure out a way to move those civilians out of harm's way. I'm not sure that's even possible, to be quite honest with you. However, the problem is when you try to facilitate the transfer of these civilians, you're also facilitating the transfer of terrorists as well, active members of Hamas. That's what I'm getting at. And Islamic Jihad and more than other, a dozen other members of, they're members of another dozen terrorist organizations that operate in the Gaza Strip, actually more than that. Nevertheless, that's the issue here. Another issue, I think, is that, and I was saying that Israel can't defeat Hamas without a ground operation in Rafah. Okay, so and also, I wouldn't say, I can't say this for sure, right? But everything indicates that there's some major tunnels underneath Rafah, and I believe we talked about this before, Bill. But and Israel has to find them, locate them, and destroy them. Problem is, those tunnels are going into Egypt, and there's been some news about it. The Egyptians aren't happy that Israel is likely going to start an operation on one of their on their border, right? So, and they're probably going to find some, I would say, even embarrassing evidence of these tunnels, right? So, so it's a delicate issue and I don't know. I think the Israelis are doing a good job about it. I think the Israelis are determined, despite all the noise that we're hearing from the international community, from the Biden administration. But the thing is, what bugs me, I think, more than anything, is that Israel has never been closer to destroying or eliminating Hamas in Gaza. All right, and now the pressure from allies is increasing to stop. So, despite all these months of fighting, and Israel's been doing really well, and it's just, I don't know, Bill. It's just kind of crazy to see this, because don't get me wrong, the Biden administration has been very supportive of Israel, especially in the beginning of the war. But now we're just seeing this weird, it's just the support's starting to fall off, right, at the most important time. And I just don't get it. I really don't. So that's where we're at right now. And it's a very strange, to say the least, but I think Israel, again, is determined, determined to eliminate Hamas. I think they will go into Rafah, barring Hamas just saying, okay, ceasefire, we will give up all the hostages, we will, surrender, or we will move our leadership to, Algeria or something. But I don't think that's going to happen either. So very complicated, to say the least.
Yeah, Hamas would, if they wanted to preserve their leadership and their fighters, the time for a surrender and preserve the Palestinian people who are caught in the middle of this fighting, I think the time to have basically what you talked about there, a surrender, that time has passed for them. Yeah, and if you look at it, for those listening, look at a map of Gaza. Rafah is literally right on the border with Egypt. And yeah, I think you're right. The Egyptians have a lot to worry about. The Egyptians are also worried about a massive refugee flood, which is a legitimate concern for the Egyptians of Palestinians crossing the border if there is an operation there. So it's, well, understandable from the Israeli perspective. They just have no choice. If their goal, and this is what they stated, is to defeat Hamas, Rafah cannot be ignored. And you had mentioned the tunnels, Joe. There's been some news over the weekend as well that a Hamas compound was, I think the best way we could describe that is a Hamas compound. There might be other ways to describe it. Was discovered under the headquarters of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees, or we'll call it UNRWA. Tell us more about that. Where was that compound discovered? What was the reaction to this from the Israelis and from the United Nations as well?
Right. So this is, surprised, but not really surprised by this.
Right.
But it's
shocking.
Yeah, I know. Listen, Hamas has demonstrated that they'll use their civilians in Gaza as a shield, right? So if they've demonstrated this already, that they'll definitely take advantage of anything they can to shield themselves from Israeli strikes. And that's what they did with this UNRWA compound. It's located in the Al-Rimal neighborhood. It's a very kind of, people describe it as a wealthy neighborhood, all right? I believe it's in the northern Gaza Strip. Anyway, so the Israelis discovered this tunnel complex underneath the headquarters of UNRWA in the Gaza Strip, and it has essentially it's a server farm, and I can't recall all the details about it, but it was a significant find. Okay, so and the power was connected to running that compound. The power to it was connected to UNRWA's electrical grid. And there were other things as well. The IDF found weapons in the offices and intelligence and documents in the offices of UNRWA. Now, I'm not saying that UNRWA itself was, acting on behalf of Hamas or anything. That those weapons and those documents may have been put there during the war by Hamas fighters. Who knows? But anyway, so they find this this significant compound under an UNRWA facility, in the headquarters facility, and this evidence just keeps piling up on UNRWA, right? We know that members of UNRWA in the Gaza Strip participated in the October 7th terrorist attack. That was bad enough. And now we're seeing this. And I imagine as the war continues, as the war goes on, that there's going to be more evidence that the IDF is going to publish, about UNRWA. And we get to a point where you say, okay, UNRWA, how can you not know this is going on in your, underneath your offices or with your personnel, right? So it's not a trustworthy organization the way the Israelis see it. So I can't imagine, at least post-war, after the war, that the Israelis will want UNRWA operating anywhere near Israel or in the Gaza Strip, because they've just shown that they can't control their personnel, and that they're just essentially penetrated by Hamas. That's what's happened here. And so it's a very interesting find over the weekend. But unfortunately, it's not surprising.
Yeah, the head of UNRWA, Philippe Lazarani, issued a Sergeant Schultz-like response, from, I'm dating myself, but I watched it as a kid, Hogan's Heroes. I see nothing, I know nothing. And here the first line from his: UNRWA did not know what is under its headquarters. And you can read his statement on Twitter. It's quite laughable. They absolutely, he calls it an alleged tunnel. It's either a tunnel or it's not a tunnel. It's certainly not an alleged tunnel. So very humorous. If you get a chance, look him up on Twitter and give it a read. Joe, a little bit more on you had mentioned that the UNRWA members took part in the October 7th massacre. What can you tell us about that? That is just absolutely outrageous. It's one thing if UNRWA is looking the other way while Hamas is building. I mean, and that's horrible, right? Building tunnels and using it. And we all know what has been going on with UNRWA and Hamas over the years. It's another thing when it's people on the UN payroll who are being funded by the United States taxpayers took part in that massacre that involved the killing of not just Israelis, but American citizens as well. I don't mean to make this just about America, but, look, we're largely American audience here. And, myself being an American citizen, it just infuriates me that my taxpayer dollars go to fund terrorists. But this just seems to be the par for the course these days. But anyway, tell us more about staff members, UNRWA staff members participating in the attack.
Yeah. So according to some of the Israeli reports that I can't recall the exact number. I think it was about 7, give or take a few, staff members participated. They even, according to reports, I'm saying this according to reports again, they used at least a UN vehicle as well. But yeah, they participated in the attacks. I don't know the exact details of what they did. There's reports that an UNRWA teacher actually held at least one of the released captives, one of the released Israeli hostages said that an UNRWA teacher held her hostage. All right. So nevertheless, UNRWA is a part of the problem here. Okay. But this isn't, of course, this isn't new. And I'll tell you, like, the mindset of UNRWA, because you reminded me of something, Bill. So this has happened a couple of years ago in November 2022. UNRWA found, I'm sure if it was the IDF or UNRWA, but one of them found a tunnel beneath one of their facilities in the Gaza Strip. So UNRWA,
I'm sure it wasn't an alleged tunnel.
Yeah, I'm getting to it, my friend. I'm getting to that. So, and then they, to their credit, they publish a statement they're condemning it. All right, but this is what they say, and so they call it a man-made. They called it a man-made cavity. They didn't even call it a tunnel. They protested a man-made cavity that was found underneath one of their facilities. So that just gives you. That's just one example. There's plenty of examples before that, but just the mindset of UNRWA here. So the problem is that UNRWA is operating. It's like UNRWA is making sure they don't piss off Hamas. That's what's happening. All right, they don't want to piss off Hamas. So they're publishing these carefully worded statements, or how you said earlier about the director of UNRWA saying that. The way he said it, right? The way he published his response to the server farm or the compound being found underneath the UNRWA HQ. They just don't want to take responsibility for it. There's no way they didn't know. So there's no way they don't know about what's going on with their facilities in the Gaza Strip. So regardless, yes. So UNRWA staffers have participated in October 7th attacks, and UNRWA is just being used by Hamas, plain and simple. All right, that's the bottom line. That's it. UNRWA is being used by Gaza Strip. So, as you could say, as a shield, you could say UNRWA is, you can also make the argument UNRWA is assisting Hamas, but nevertheless, it's a problem. And I just don't. And I think this is the big reason why in the last few weeks we saw the news about countries stopping aid, because they saw what was happening. The Israelis gave them the evidence that hey, look, this is what's happening in UNRWA. They saw it, and they said, okay, we're stopping funding. I don't know how long that's going to last, but I think that's what's happening here.
Yeah, numerous nations have come out and said they were suspending funding, including the United States. I guess that's a good step, but what's going to happen? You know it, and I know it, Joe. This will all end, and UNRWA will be back in the business. It's lucrative business for them. Here's what the UNRWA director Lezrani said about looking for the evidence of Hamas activity at its facilities. It says, this is a quote: "In times of no active conflict, UNRWA inspects inside its premises every quarter. The last inspection for the UNRWA Gaza premises was completed in September 2023. So either they couldn't find it, didn't want to find it, or Hamas sometime between September of 2023 and October 7th, amazingly quickly built what did they call it? An underground cavern?
A man-made cavity.
Man-made cavity, alleged tunnel. So it's one of those things. And, I suspect Sergeant Schultz is alive, well, and living, tons of Sergeant Schultz alive, well, and living and breathing and operating in UNRWA to this day. Look, we've gotten, all of the evidence that's come out. We could only imagine what else is going on within UNRWA, what'll be exposed. This has to be, if I'm UNRWA, if I'm the director of that. He, by the way, he is refusing to step down after this is all being exposed. I suspect UNRWA's greatest fear isn't Palestinian casualties or destruction of infrastructure or anything of that. It's these operations exposing the UNRWA's complicity with groups like Hamas.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough, it's, I think that the way I'm seeing this, especially with all this evidence coming out, is that they probably knew what was going on, but the way they thought is that, well, we provide services to Palestinians that really need it. Okay, so if we if there's maybe some issues, some possible Hamas activity, we won't say anything or just not look into it. I'm getting that feeling. I'm not saying that's the case here, okay, but I'm starting to get that feeling where, because it's not just the evidence happening, emerging now. This has been going on for a long time. Some really weird stuff, just like that man-made cavity thing I was just telling you about. That was just a couple of years ago. So I don't know. It's just strange, but I'm just trying to think of a reason why they wouldn't, come, just be honest. That's even with the statement that you were just saying a little while ago about the UNRWA director. You can tell that they still don't want to own up to it. Oh, we didn't know anything. We didn't. I mean, come on, you knew it. I mean, I'm sorry. So anyway, it's just it's all nonsense, I think, to be quite honest with you. And by the end of this, I don't know. I don't think UNRWA is going to, at least in its current form, I don't think UNRWA is going to be back in the Gaza Strip. Maybe something else. Who knows? But so yeah, not good for sure. So, and yeah, I imagine again, like I said before, I imagine there's going to be, the Israelis will find more evidence or will end up publishing more damning evidence, in the coming weeks or months.
Hey, Joe, and as we're recording this, and it's about just after noon on Monday, February 12th, there are some reports out there, some from what appear to be some pretty credible individuals, that Israel may be seeking to shut down all of UNRWA's offices in Israel. There's what I'm looking at now. It's in Hebrew, so I can't read it, but it does appear to be an official statement. But we'll wait and see. That'll develop. Would that be a major blow to UNRWA, or is it? I imagine there has to be coordination between the Israelis and UNRWA for things to go in and out of Gaza. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, will it be a major blow? Hard to say. It's because I don't know how important their operations are, because I believe they have an office in Jerusalem. So, nevertheless, I mean, this is completely expected after everything that was found, right, in the last month. So I'm not surprised. But what will happen with it exactly, who knows? I mean, I imagine that when there is whether it's a ceasefire or some type of end to the war, that there will be some sort of mechanism or group or aid group, whether it's the UN or somebody else or someone else, that will try to step in for UNRWA, or maybe UNRWA again. Who knows? But I think something like UNRWA is needed, but obviously not in its current form. So I think something like them, or they will be back.
Yeah, you anticipated that. That was exactly what I was going to say. The sad thing is an organization like UNRWA is needed. It just can't be operating like UNRWA has operated. This may be one of those ones where the Israelis sort of, clamp down on, and then, as a concession, allow us back into work. And
yes,
but boy, it just can't operate as it has in the past to be essentially be a $1 billion a year funded organization, under UN auspices that operates as a de facto arm of the Hamas terrorist state. Again, bugs me that my tax dollars go to pay for things like these, and it's far too often that it does. That's
it. I'll say, sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
I think at the end of the war, I think there's going to be some tough concessions for the Israelis. It may be in the form of, it just depends how things go, right? So, for example, if there's a ceasefire, Hamas says, okay, ceasefire, we'll release all the hostages. I'd say they do that, but they don't technically, it's just a temporary ceasefire. And this is just one of the outcomes. It's just temporary ceasefire, but Hamas says, we'll release all the hostages, but you're going to have to release Palestinian prisoners. I think the Israelis will have to make some difficult decisions releasing some senior Hamas members and Islamic Jihad members that are serving lengthy prison sentences right now. There's quite a few of them. Hamas has, in the past years, Hamas has not hidden the fact that they want specific individuals that are in Israeli prisons out. And these are some really, really bad guys. Marwan Barghouti, there's the PFLP Secretary General, Ahmed Sadat, and there's a lot more than I can mention. But there's going to be some difficult decisions. But at the end of the day, Israel will probably release them if they can get all the hostages, even the ones that are unfortunately that have been killed. All right, are the bodies of hostages. So they'll probably do that just to get the hostages because it's such an important objective for them, or one of their goals, one of their top goals. So from the onset of the war, so to retrieve to rescue all these hostages, or at least get them back. So yeah, tough decisions, like you're saying, have to be made. And in the end, if there's some type of lasting peace, if Hamas is eliminated from Gaza, or it's or they're defanged, I guess you can call it. They're so-called military arm, but there's no military wing of Hamas. They're all one organization. I'm sorry to say, yes, Hamas, yes. So there's no military wing of Hamas. So I hear that a lot, and people try to make a distinction between a political and military with Hamas. They operate, they cooperate, and they work together. So regardless, I think there needs to be some sort of aid there in the Gaza Strip. But that's a conversation for another day, because we just have to see how things turn out. There's a million ways things can turn out here. And Israel may cave to the pressure, right? Israel may not win here. Israel may lose this war. Hamas may stay in place. Because again, like we talked about before, there's a lot of international pressure right now on the Israelis, especially, and from the United States, unfortunately, at this stage when Israel is winning. So, but that's, you call it politics, you call it a lot of things, but that's where we're at right now.
Yeah. So, two quick things. Prime Minister Netanyahu recently had said he's not going to do another one of these lopsided exchanges of, 1,000 Palestinian prisoners for 130 hostages, alive and dead. But I think that remains to be seen. I was actually surprised to see him take such a public stand on that, because that's the kind of thing that could be used against him. Do you think he's serious about that, or do you think it was just sort of a heat of the moment statement?
I think he won't release thousands and thousands of He's not going to empty Israeli jails. Okay, that's what what Hamas wants, right? They have enough hostages. If you go back to the previous hostage releases that have happened, especially Gilad Shalit, one for approximately 1,000 Palestinians, one Israeli soldier for approximately 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, and they have over 130 hostages right now. Yes, technically, if you go by those numbers, they could empty Israeli prisons. However, I think that's what he was referring to, that he's not going to, release, thousands of Palestinians that are convicted for terrorism. However, I think that he would release. I think he would do a lopsided. It'd still be lopsided, I think, a prisoner exchange. However, I think he would get back the hostages, and that's what's most important. But again, they're trying to avoid that. They want to destroy Hamas and rescue the hostages, without having to go through a prisoner exchange, or rather a captive or hostage for prisoner exchange. So we'll see what happens. There's still a lot of things going on. And of course, this looming Rafah operation, which seems that it will happen despite the Biden administration's concerns. So we'll see.
Yeah, and we'll finish on this. President Biden late last week, he described Israel's operations in Gaza, and this is in quotes, over the top, end quote. That sparked a pretty interesting reaction from Netanyahu over the weekend. He said, we're going after you're going after terrorists, and we're trying to minimize civilian casualties, but we're fighting with terrorists who hide amongst the civilian population. I'm paraphrasing that, but that's essentially what he said. Is the Israeli government increasingly fearful that the Biden administration is siding with the group that attacked Israel on October 7th?
I don't see it like that, but I mean, everyone has their own way of seeing things, right? I think Biden is under a tremendous amount of domestic pressure right now. All right. I mean, look, we're not too far off from presidential elections, right? He wants to be reelected as president. So this is a major issue, this war. So he wants to see it resolved. The sooner, the better. Okay. That's the important thing. However, I think the actions of the Biden administration and these leaks that we're seeing being reported, especially in recent weeks, about the relationship between Biden and Netanyahu. Biden calling Netanyahu an a-hole. I think that came out earlier today. These are just reports. I'm not sure if it's true. It's just the reports that I read. But it's stuff like that. That's detrimental. This is detrimental against the war effort here. We are seeing the IDF making gains against Hamas. Listen, again, like I said it before, Israel has never gotten closer to destroying or eliminating Hamas in Gaza, ever, okay? And this is 4 months of this already. You can't, there's no turning back from it, I think, the way I see it. I think that's the way the Israelis see it as well. So it's, there's going to be, I think things are going to get rough, okay, the next few weeks, maybe in the next few months between, and when it comes to Israel and the United States. There's going to be some more nasty words being said, unfortunately, unless hopefully, but the thing also I want to add is that Hamas is taking advantage of this. That's why they see that and we've talked about, again, we've mentioned it before from the beginning, just wait it out. If you can wait it out, Israel's own allies will stop them. That's what's happening. That's the way they see it.
Yeah,
go ahead.
We worried at the beginning, Joe, that time, pressure from the allies. Now we're 4 months in. I think both you and I are shocked that they've made it this far, right? But, the President Biden, he's under a lot of domestic pressure. The irony in this is it doesn't matter what he says. It's what he does that matters to those who are going to be influenced by these issues. And they view any support, any whatsoever, one bullet that goes or $1 that goes over to Israel to be supporting, the horrific Zionist occupiers, right? And so so it's a combination of he can't say anything to appease those people who are supporting Hamas and other terror groups. And yet the statements he makes, like saying it's encouraging Hamas to hold out. That's the other the message Hamas gets is, oh, I see divisions. We could wait this out. And so in a way, these statements are extending the conflict because it's holding out hope to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and all the other terror groups that are fighting the Israel Defense Forces right at this moment. That's what really stuns me about this. Like, you don't need to get a PhD at a fancy school in Washington to know that Biden is not going to convince his base that is anti-Israel, that he is on their side. And he's undermining the Israel Defense Force and the Israeli government's efforts by encouraging Hamas to hold out. That's what drives me crazy about it.
That's exactly it. And I think Hamas understood this. especially Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, when he and others planned this attack, that and because they've seen it before, they've seen it in other conflicts and previous conflicts with Israel, that eventually enough international pressure will force Israel to a ceasefire, right? And I think they calculated that this was going to happen again in this stage and with this conflict. So it's very it's tough, but in the end, it's Israel's allies that are putting on the most pressure for them to stop, the way I see it. Not Hezbollah in Lebanon, not the other Iran-backed groups in Syria, or what's happening with the Houthis in Yemen and the Red Sea, or the attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. It's with the biggest amount of pressure is coming from Israel's allies, which is crazy to think, but that's what's happening, right? At this point, especially at this crucial time. So Sinwar, and Iran and all its proxies and all its proxies in the region are just sitting back and watching this, because this is what they probably anticipated, I think, and it's playing out, right? So we'll see if the Israelis can hold out. But I think they're very determined. I really believe they're determined to end this the way they want it. Okay. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure. You got the whole International Court of Justice, this charge for genocide, which is just nonsense the way I see it. But yeah, so they're just determined, I think. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll end it with that, Joe, with friends like these. Here we are, right? But hopefully Israel is able to weather their friends and put an end to Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad and these other groups, or at least beat them down enough that the thought of executing another attack like that, won't enter their minds for another 50 to 100 years, because that's ultimately what needs to be done. And thanks, everyone, for listening to today's episode of Generation Jihad. Just a reminder, you can listen to us on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. Please subscribe to Generation Jihad and leave us a review, preferably a positive one, but only if we earned it. Thanks again, and we'll see you all again real soon.